Sometimes life takes everything you love and leaves you with nothing but a prayer and a key to a place you never wanted to go. For Noah Briggs, that place was his late grandfather's cabin, a crumbling wreck in the middle of nowhere that his own family called a death trap. After losing his wife to cancer and his job to downsizing, Noah had no choice but to pack up his 8-year-old son Milo and head to the northern woods. The cabin was falling apart, the locals were unfriendly, and winter was coming fast. While Noah spent his days trying to patch holes and figure out how they'd survive, little Milo explored the forest around their new home. One afternoon, chasing a red fox through the trees, Milo discovered something buried beneath moss and roots, a hidden cellar door his grandfather had kept secret for decades. Inside that cellar was something that would change their lives forever. But what secret had Noah's grandfather been protecting all those years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The brass key felt heavier than it should have in Noah's palm as he stood before the weathered cabin door. 3 months ago, he'd been a project manager at a mid-sized engineering firm in Portland, coming home each evening to Sarah's warm smile and Milo's excited chatter about his second-grade adventures. 3 months ago, he'd had a future that made sense. Now Sarah was gone, buried beneath a simple granite stone that bore her name and the dates that bookended a life cut far too short. The cancer had taken her quickly once it spread, leaving Noah to navigate the bewildering maze of medical bills, funeral expenses, and the hollow ache that filled every corner of their small apartment. When the company announced layoffs 2 weeks after the funeral, Noah's name was on the list. Budget cuts, they said, nothing personal. 15 years of dedicated service reduced to a severance package that barely covered 2 months of rent. The lawyer's call about his grandfather's property had seemed like a cruel joke at first. Noah hadn't spoken to the old man in over a decade, not since the bitter argument that had split the family down the middle. His grandfather, Ezra Briggs, had been what his mother diplomatically called difficult, a stubborn old coot who lived alone in the woods and refused all attempts at reconciliation. When Noah's father died young, Ezra had blamed Noah's mother for taking the family away from their roots. The resentment had festered for years, until it seemed easier to pretend the old man didn't exist. But Ezra had remembered them in his will, leaving the cabin and its 47 acres to Noah with a simple note, for when you need to remember who you are. At the time, Noah had considered it a final insult. Now, with eviction notices piling up and his savings account showing double digits, the inheritance looked different. It looked like survival. The drive north had taken 6 hours through increasingly remote terrain. Milo had pressed his face against the passenger window, watching the landscape change from suburban sprawl to farmland to dense forest. The boy had been unnaturally quiet since his mother's death, his usual bubbling curiosity replaced by a watchful stillness that broke Noah's heart. The move had been presented as an adventure, but at 8 years old, Milo was old enough to understand that adventures weren't supposed to feel this scary. The cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by towering pines and thick undergrowth. Noah's first glimpse of it had made his stomach drop. The roof sagged ominously in 2 places, patches of moss and lichen covering the weathered cedar shingles. The front porch leaned at an angle that defied logic, supported by posts that looked ready to surrender at any moment. Paint peeled from the window frames like old skin, and several panes of glass were cracked or missing entirely. "Is this really where we're going to live, Dad?" Milo had asked, his voice small and uncertain. Noah had swallowed his own doubts and managed what he hoped was a reassuring smile. "It just needs a little work, buddy. We'll fix it up together." But as they'd unloaded their meager possessions from the aging Honda Civic, Noah wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. The isolation was complete. The nearest neighbor was over 3 miles away, and the closest town, Pine Ridge, was a 20-minute drive down a winding dirt road. Cell phone coverage was spotty at best, and the cabin's landline had been disconnected years ago. Inside, the situation was only marginally better. The main room was larger than Noah had expected, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and exposed beams running across the ceiling. But years of neglect showed everywhere. Water stains on the walls, loose floorboards, and the musty smell of dampness and disuse. The kitchen was functional, but dated, with a propane refrigerator that wheezed and clicked ominously. The bathroom had running water, thankfully, though the pipes groaned and shuddered with each use. Milo had claimed the smaller of the two bedrooms, its single window overlooking the forest behind the cabin. Noah had helped him arrange his few belongings, some clothes, a handful of books, and the stuffed elephant Sarah had given him for his 7th birthday. The elephant, named Peanuts, had become Milo's constant companion since the funeral, a tangible connection to the mother who would never read him another bedtime story. Their first week had been a blur of repairs and adjustments. Noah tackled the most urgent problems, patching holes in the roof, securing loose boards, clearing debris from the gutters. He'd driven into Pine Ridge for supplies, encountering polite but distant locals who seemed to view outsiders with suspicion. The hardware store owner, a grizzled man named Frank Kowalski, had been helpful enough, but made it clear that city folks usually didn't last long in the woods. Ezra was different, Frank had said, while ringing up Noah's purchases. Kept to himself, but he belonged here. Built that cabin with his own hands back in '74. Course, he never did tell anyone much about himself. Always said the woods had their own secrets. Noah had filed the comment away, focusing on the immediate challenges of making the cabin livable. But as the days passed, he began to notice things that didn't quite fit. The cabin was solidly built despite its neglected appearance, with details that spoke of careful craftsmanship. The stone fireplace was a work of art, each rock fitted with precision. The exposed beams showed intricate joinery that would have impressed any carpenter. For a man supposedly living as a hermit, Ezra had invested considerable skill and resources into his home. Milo adapted to their new environment with the resilience of childhood. After the initial shock wore off, he began exploring the immediate area around the cabin, always staying within sight as Noah worked on repairs. The boy seemed drawn to the forest, spending hours watching the play of light through the canopy or following the paths of industrious squirrels and chattering chipmunks. It was on their second Thursday that Milo made his first real discovery. Noah was on the roof, replacing damaged shingles, when he heard his son calling from the tree line, "Dad, come look at this!" Noah climbed down carefully, finding Milo crouched beside a massive cedar stump about 50 yards behind the cabin. The boy was running his fingers along deep grooves carved into the weathered wood. "Look, Dad," Grandpa Ezra made pictures in the tree. Noah knelt beside his son, examining the markings more closely. They weren't random scratches. Someone had deliberately carved symbols and what looked like a partial map into the stump's surface. The lines were weathered but still clear, showing what appeared to be landmarks and distances. At the center was a symbol that looked like a small house with an X marked beneath it. "What do you think it means?" Milo asked, his eyes bright with curiosity. "I'm not sure, buddy," Noah replied, though something about the carving made him uneasy. "Probably just old trail markers. Your great-grandfather knew these woods pretty well." But as they walked back to the cabin, Noah found himself glancing over his shoulder at the carved stump. The symbol bothered him. It was too deliberate, too purposeful to be a simple trail marker. And the X beneath the house shape seemed to be pointing in a specific direction, deeper into the forest. That evening, as Noah prepared dinner on the temperamental propane stove, he found himself thinking about his grandfather for the first time in years. His memories of Ezra were complicated. The man had been distant and stern during Noah's childhood visits, more interested in his projects than in getting to know his grandson. But there had been moments of unexpected kindness. Times when the old man's eyes would soften and he'd share stories about the forest or teach Noah how to read animal tracks. "Tell me about Grandpa Ezra," Milo said suddenly. As if reading his father's thoughts, Noah set down his spatula, considering how much to share. "He was your great-grandfather, actually. My dad's father. He lived here for a long time, almost 40 years. Why didn't we visit him?" It was a question Noah had been dreading. How do you explain family feuds and stubborn pride to a child who's already lost so much? "Sometimes adults have disagreements that go on too long," he said finally. "I wish we'd made peace with him before he died." Milo absorbed this information with the serious expression he'd worn so often lately. "Do you think he left us the cabin because he was sorry?" The possibility had occurred to Noah, but he wasn't ready to explore it. "Maybe, buddy. Maybe he just wanted to make sure we had somewhere to go when we needed it." After dinner, they sat by the fireplace, Noah reading aloud from one of Milo's books, while the boy leaned against his side. The warmth of the fire and the steady rhythm of the words were soothing, creating a pocket of peace in their uncertain world. For the first time since Sarah's death, Noah felt something approaching contentment, but as the fire burned down to embers and he carried a sleepy Milo to bed, Noah's eyes kept drifting to the family photo he'd found on the mantelpiece. It showed a much younger Ezra standing beside the cabin, which looked new and pristine in the faded color snapshot. The man in the photo wore work clothes and a serious expression, but there was something in his eyes, a watchfulness, as if he was guarding secrets the camera couldn't capture. The photo was in a simple wooden frame that had been cracked at some point and mended with careful precision. Water damage had stained one corner of the picture, but someone had taken care to preserve what remained. It was the only personal item they'd found in the cabin, everything else having been cleared out by the estate lawyer. As Noah settled into his own bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the forest, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush, the distant howl of what might have been a coyote, he wondered what other secrets the cabin might hold. Ezra had lived here for 4 decades, yet the place felt empty of personal history. Where were his books, his papers, his memories? What had he done with himself all those years alone in the woods? Outside, the wind picked up, sending pine branches scratching against the cabin walls like fingers seeking entry. Noah pulled the blanket higher and tried to ignore the feeling that he and Milo were not quite alone, that the forest itself was watching and waiting to see what these newcomers would do with the legacy they'd inherited. In the morning, Milo would make his discovery. But tonight, the secret slept peacefully beneath moss and roots, waiting for a curious boy and a red fox to wake them from their long slumber. It started with the fox, a flash of russet fur darting between the pine trunks like liquid fire. Milo had been collecting pine cones near the cabin's back porch when he spotted the creature, its bushy tail disappearing into a thicket about 100 yards into the forest. Without thinking, he dropped his collection and gave chase, his sneakers squelching through the damp undergrowth. "Milo!" Noah called from where he was patching yet another hole in the cabin's siding. "Don't go too far!" But the boy was already weaving between the trees, following glimpses of red fur that seemed to stay just ahead of him, always visible but never quite within reach. The fox moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly where it was going, pausing occasionally to look back and ensure Milo was still following. The chase led deeper into the forest than Milo had ventured before, past the familiar landmarks he'd learned to recognize. The canopy grew thicker here, filtering the afternoon sunlight into dappled patterns that danced across the forest floor. Ancient cedars and firs towered overhead, their trunks so massive that Milo couldn't have wrapped his arms around them even with his father's help. The fox finally stopped at the edge of a small clearing, its intelligent amber eyes fixed on Milo as if delivering a message. Then, with a flick of its tail, it vanished into the underbrush, leaving the boy alone among the trees. Milo stood catching his breath, suddenly aware of how far he'd come from the cabin. The forest felt different here, older, more watchful. But instead of fear, he felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. That's when he noticed the irregularity in the ground. Most of the clearing was covered in the usual carpet of fallen leaves and pine needles, but in one spot, The earth formed a distinct rectangular depression, about 3 feet wide and 6 feet long. The edges were partially hidden by moss and creeping vines, but the shape was too perfect to be natural. Milo knelt beside the depression, brushing away layers of organic debris with his small hands. His fingers encountered something hard and smooth beneath the vegetation, wood, worn by weather but still solid. As he cleared more of the covering, the outline became unmistakable, a door, set flush with the ground and camouflaged by decades of forest growth. The door was made of thick planks held together by iron hinges that had somehow resisted rust despite their age. A heavy metal ring served as a handle, though it took all of Milo's strength to pull it free from the grip of roots and moss that had grown around it. The door opened with a groan of protest, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into darkness. Cool air flowed up from below, carrying the scent of dry earth and something else, something that reminded Milo of his grandfather's old garage back in Portland, where tools and mechanical things had their own particular smell. "Dad," Milo called, his voice echoing strangely in the forest's stillness. "Dad, come quick." It took several minutes for Noah to find his son, following the boy's excited shouts through the trees. When he finally reached the clearing, the sight of the open cellar door stopped him cold. "Milo, get away from there," he said sharply, his parental instincts overriding curiosity. That could be dangerous, but Milo was practically vibrating with excitement. "Dad, look! It's like a secret room under the ground. Grandpa Ezra must have built it." Noah approached cautiously, his mind racing through possibilities. An old root cellar, maybe, or storm shelter. But the construction looked too sophisticated for simple storage. The stone steps were precisely cut and fitted, leading down into what appeared to be a substantial underground space. "We should go back to the cabin," Noah said, though his own curiosity was beginning to override his caution. "Get a flashlight, and there's light down there already," Milo interrupted, pointing into the opening. "Look!" Noah peered into the cellar and realized his son was right. A faint glow emanated from somewhere below, too steady to be reflected sunlight. Someone had installed electric lighting in this hidden space. "Please, Dad," Milo pleaded. "Just a quick look. I promise I'll stay right behind you." Against his better judgment, Noah found himself descending the stone steps, with Milo close behind. The cellar was larger than he'd expected, roughly 20 feet square, with walls of fitted stone and a floor of smooth concrete. But it was the contents that made him stop and stare. The space was set up like a workshop or laboratory, with workbenches along 2 walls and shelving that held an assortment of equipment and supplies. Most surprising of all was the electrical system, a small generator in one corner connected to a series of lights and what appeared to be a ventilation fan. Everything was covered in dust, but looked to be in working order. But what drew Noah's attention was the far wall, where an old film projector sat on a wooden table, surrounded by dozens of metal canisters that could only contain film reels. Beside the projector was a white sheet stretched between 2 poles, creating a makeshift movie screen. "What is all this stuff?" Milo whispered, his voice filled with awe. Noah moved deeper into the cellar, examining the equipment more closely. The projector was a vintage Bell and Howell model from the 1940s, the kind used in schools and small theaters. The film canisters were labeled with dates spanning from 1975 to 2014, all written in the same careful handwriting. On the main workbench, Noah found a collection of items that made even less sense. Surveying equipment, geological charts, what appeared to be patent documents, and a collection of old photographs showing various locations around the property. Everything was organized with military precision, as if this hidden space had been used for serious, long-term work. "Dad, look at this," Milo called from near the projector. He was holding up one of the film canisters, squinting at the faded label. "It says Family Memories, Code 7. What do you think that means?" Noah took the canister, feeling its weight and examining the label more closely. "I'm not sure, buddy. Your great-grandfather was a more complicated man than any of us realized." As they explored the cellar further, Noah's amazement grew. This wasn't the hobby space of a lonely hermit. It was the hidden workshop of someone engaged in serious, methodical work. But work on what? And why had Ezra gone to such lengths to keep it secret? The generator started easily when Noah pulled the cord, filling the space with light and the hum of the ventilation fan. Decades of careful planning had gone into this hidden room, from the waterproof seals around the door to the sophisticated electrical system. Ezra had built this place to last and to remain secret. "Can we watch one of the movies?" Milo asked, his excitement barely contained. Noah hesitated. Something about the cellar felt intensely private, as if they were intruding on secrets that weren't meant for them. But they were here, and the films were labeled as family memories. Surely there was no harm in seeing what his grandfather had considered important enough to preserve. "One movie," he agreed. "Then we need to go back and think about what we've found here." It took some experimentation to get the old projector working, but Noah had always been good with mechanical things. As the machine hummed to life and cast its beam onto the makeshift screen, he threaded the first reel of Family Memories Code 7 into the mechanism. The film that began to play was in color, but clearly amateur. Shaky camera work, uneven lighting, the home movie quality of a family gathering. It showed the cabin in its prime, surrounded by a well-maintained yard and garden. A younger Ezra appeared in several shots, always busy with some project or another, but as the film continued, Noah began to notice oddities. The camera would linger on specific objects: a survey stake in the ground, a particular rock formation, a wooden post with carved markings. And occasionally, Ezra would look directly at the camera and make deliberate gestures, pointing or holding up fingers in what appeared to be some kind of code. "He's trying to tell us something," Milo observed, with the clarity that children sometimes possess. Like a secret message. Noah was beginning to reach the same conclusion. This wasn't just a family movie. It was a record, a message preserved for someone who knew how to interpret it. But the meaning remained frustratingly unclear. The film ended after 20 minutes, leaving father and son sitting in the dim light of the cellar, surrounded by the mystery of Ezra's hidden life. Outside, afternoon was fading toward evening, and Noah knew they needed to return to the cabin. But he also knew that everything had changed. The legacy Ezra had left them was far more complex than a simple property inheritance. As they climbed back up the stone steps and carefully camouflaged the cellar door, Noah felt the weight of newfound responsibility. Whatever his grandfather had been doing in that hidden space, whatever secrets the films and documents contained, it was now their burden to understand and protect. That night, as Milo slept peacefully with peanuts clutched in his arms, Noah lay awake staring at the ceiling and thinking about the hidden cellar door. The artifact they discovered wasn't just an entrance to a secret room. It was a doorway between their desperate present and a future that might hold answers to questions they didn't even know how to ask. Yet the discovery of the cellar had awakened something. In both Noah and Milo, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. They were no longer just refugees seeking shelter. They were inheritors of a mystery that demanded to be solved. The following morning brought the first real breakthrough with the vintage projector. Noah had risen early, his mind still churning over the previous day's discovery, and found Milo already awake and dressed, clutching his stuffed elephant and staring out the window toward the forest. "Can we go back to the secret room, Dad?" the boy asked without preamble. Noah had been expecting the question. The cellar and its contents had dominated his thoughts through a restless night, and he knew there would be no peace until they'd explored its mysteries more thoroughly. "After breakfast," he promised. "But we do this carefully and methodically. No touching anything unless I say it's okay." The walk to the cellar felt different in the morning light. What had seemed like an adventure the day before now carried the weight of serious investigation. Noah brought a notebook, determined to document everything they found, and a proper flashlight to supplement the cellar's electrical system. The generator started on the first pull, and soon they were surrounded by the familiar hum of machinery and the bright illumination of overhead lights. In daylight, or what passed for it in the underground space, the cellar revealed details they'd missed during their initial exploration. The workbenches held more than Noah had initially realized. Beneath protective cloth covers, he found surveying instruments that looked professional-grade, geological core samples labeled with dates and locations, and what appeared to be chemical testing equipment. Everything was meticulously organized and maintained, as if Ezra had been conducting ongoing research for decades, but it was the film projector that drew them back. Noah had brought down an extension cord from the cabin, allowing him to position the machine more carefully and adjust the screen for optimal viewing. The mechanical precision of the old Bell and Howell was impressive. Despite its age, it ran smoothly and quietly, a testament to both its original construction and Ezra's careful maintenance. The projector itself was a thing of beauty, its chrome and black metal housing reflecting the cellar's lights. Built in an era when machines were designed to last generations, it represented a level of craftsmanship rarely seen in modern equipment. Every gear and mechanism had been maintained with obsessive care, oiled and adjusted to preserve perfect operation across decades of use. "Let's try a different movie," Milo suggested, examining the labeled canisters. "This one says Survey Records, Phase 1. The film that emerged was dramatically different from the family memories they'd watched the day before. Shot in a documentary style with steady camera work, it showed Ezra conducting what appeared to be a professional land survey. He moved systematically across the property, taking measurements, collecting soil samples, and documenting findings in a leather-bound notebook. What struck Noah most was his grandfather's obvious expertise. This wasn't the work of an amateur hobbyist. Ezra handled the surveying equipment with the skill of a professional, and his methodology was rigorous and thorough. The film showed him marking survey points, taking photographs of rock formations, and carefully cataloging everything he found. "Look how careful he is," Milo observed, watching his great-grandfather methodically work through what appeared to be a grid pattern across the property. "He's like a scientist." The comparison was apt. Ezra's approach to documenting the land was scientific in its precision and scope. The film captured him taking multiple readings at each location, cross-referencing his measurements, and making detailed notes that he consulted frequently throughout the process. Halfway through the reel, the focus shifted to a specific area about a quarter-mile from the cabin. Ezra spent considerable time here, setting up equipment and taking multiple readings. The camera captured him making detailed notes, then looking directly at the lens and holding up 5 fingers, followed by 3, then 8. "More code," Milo observed. 538? What do you think that means? Noah paused the projector, studying the frozen image of his grandfather's serious face. "I think it might be coordinates, or maybe a reference to something in his notes. We need to find his documentation." The search for written records led them to explore the cellar more systematically. Noah had noticed filing cabinets during their first visit, but hadn't had time to examine them properly. Now, with the projector providing clear evidence that Ezra had been conducting serious research, finding his written documentation became a priority. The first cabinet they examined was locked, but the key was tucked beneath a dust cover on one of the workbenches, another sign of Ezra's methodical approach to organization. Inside, they found folders arranged by date and subject, each one meticulously labeled and cross-referenced to corresponding film reels. Property survey, geological assessment, Noah read from one folder tab. Patent research, environmental technologies, legal correspondence, intellectual property rights. "This is incredible. Milo, your great-grandfather was documenting everything." The folders contained hand-drawn maps, technical diagrams, and what appeared to be copies of patent applications. But more intriguingly, they also held correspondence with various government agencies, suggesting that Ezra had been in communication with officials about his research. One letter, dated just 2 years before Ezra's death, was from the Department of Environmental Quality regarding mineral rights on his property. The language was formal and bureaucratic, but it suggested that Ezra had been pursuing some kind of official recognition or certification for his land. "Dad, look at this," Milo said, holding up a photograph from one of the folders. "It's the same place we saw in the movie." The photograph showed the area where Ezra had spent so much time in the survey film, but this image revealed details the movie had missed. Distinctive rock formations and a particular arrangement of trees made it clear that this was indeed the location referenced by the numbers, 538. But what made the photograph truly significant was what it showed beneath the surface. Someone had used ground-penetrating radar or similar technology to map subsurface features, and the resulting image showed what appeared to be a substantial underground cavity in exactly the location Ezra had been surveying. "There's something buried there," Noah realized. "Or maybe another room like this one." The implications were staggering. If Ezra had built multiple hidden spaces on the property, if he'd been conducting research that required this level of secrecy and documentation, then their inheritance was far more complex than they'd imagined. As they continued examining the projector and its associated equipment, Noah began to appreciate the sophistication of Ezra's setup. The old Bell and Howell wasn't just a movie projector, it was part of an integrated documentation system. Additional attachments allowed it to project slides and photographs, while a connected tape recorder could provide synchronized audio commentary. He could watch his own movies and listen to his notes at the same time, Milo said, figuring out the system with the intuitive understanding children often possess for mechanical puzzles. Noah tested the tape recorder, finding it loaded with a reel that corresponded to the survey film they'd just watched. Ezra's voice, clear and methodical, provided detailed commentary on his surveying process, explaining his techniques and the significance of various measurements. Grid reference 538 shows unusual density readings, Ezra's recorded voice explained. Preliminary analysis suggests significant mineral deposits at depth of 12 to 15 feet. Recommend detailed core sampling and geological assessment. The revelation that their property contained mineral deposits added another layer to the mystery. Were these deposits valuable? Was that why Ezra had been so secretive about his research? And if so, why hadn't he simply filed the appropriate claims and extracted whatever wealth lay beneath the surface? But as Noah continued listening to the audio commentary, a different picture began to emerge. Ezra's research hadn't been focused on extraction, it had been focused on protection. His surveys and assessments were designed to document the land's natural resources, not for exploitation, but for preservation. Environmental impact must be considered in any future development, Ezra's voice continued. These deposits represent both opportunity and responsibility. The techniques I've developed could allow sustainable extraction without ecosystem damage, but only if properly implemented. The vintage film projector that had seemed like a simple piece of old equipment was revealing itself to be the key to understanding Ezra's life work. Every reel, every recording, every document in the cellar was part of a comprehensive archive, documenting decades of careful research and planning. As afternoon approached, and they prepared to return to the cabin, Noah felt the weight of inheritance shifting again. They weren't just the owners of a rundown cabin in some forested land, they were the inheritors of a scientific legacy that could have implications far beyond their immediate needs. The projector sat silent in the cellar's artificial light, its polished surfaces reflecting the overhead bulbs. But Noah knew they'd return tomorrow and the day after, until they'd uncovered every secret Ezra had preserved in this hidden archive. Walking back through the forest, Milo skipped ahead while Noah followed more slowly, his mind processing everything they'd learned. The family photo on the cabin's mantelpiece would never look the same. The serious expression in Ezra's eyes now clearly reflected the weight of knowledge he'd carried alone. For so many years, the breakthrough came on their third day of systematic exploration. Noah had been methodically cataloging the film reels, while Milo worked on a child-sized puzzle Ezra had apparently left behind. a wooden map of the property that fit together to reveal various marked locations. "Dad, I think I figured out how to watch the secret parts," Milo announced, holding up a film canister labeled Family Gathering 1983, Code Sequence Alpha. Noah looked up from his notebook. "What do you mean, secret parts?" Milo pointed to markings on the film canister that Noah had initially dismissed as wear patterns. "See these little dots? They're like the ones on the projector. I think you have to line them up." Examining the projector more carefully, Noah discovered that his son was right. What he'd assumed were decorative elements or manufacturer's marks were actually alignment indicators. When the dots on the film canister were matched with corresponding marks on the projector, additional controls became accessible, controls that weren't visible during normal operation. "You're brilliant, buddy," Noah said, adjusting the projector according to Milo's discovery. "Let's see what happens when we do this right." The coded home movies that emerged were a revelation. What had appeared to be innocent family footage contained layers of hidden information, accessible only when the projector was properly configured. Ezra would conduct seemingly normal activities, gardening, maintenance work, casual conversations with neighbors, but embed crucial data through subtle visual cues that only became apparent when viewed through the modified projection system. In one sequence, Ezra appeared to be simply walking the property boundaries, but the coded viewing revealed that he was actually conducting a systematic environmental assessment. His seemingly random stops corresponded to specific GPS coordinates. His casual gestures indicated soil composition readings, and his interactions with natural landmarks documented wildlife patterns and water sources. "It's like he's talking to us from the past," Milo said, watching his great-grandfather point directly at the camera while holding up a series of hand signals that now clearly corresponded to numerical data. The sophistication of the system impressed Noah deeply. Ezra had created a method of preserving and transmitting complex information that would appear completely innocent to casual observers. Anyone discovering the films would see only harmless family memories, while those who understood the coding system would have access to decades of accumulated research and documentation. But the most significant discovery came when they loaded a film labeled Property Assessment Final Survey, 1995. This reel had been stored separately from the others in a temperature-controlled container that suggested special importance. The images that appeared on the makeshift screen took Noah's breath away. Shot with professional-grade equipment, the film showed detailed underground surveys of their entire property. Using ground-penetrating radar and other sophisticated instruments, Ezra had mapped an extensive network of natural caves and mineral veins running beneath their 47 acres. But more than just documenting natural features, the survey revealed clear evidence of valuable deposits, rare earth elements, precious metals, and mineral formations that appeared to be far more extensive than anything suggested by the preliminary surveys they'd seen in the earlier films. "Look at all those glowing spots." Milo pointed to areas on the screen where Ezra had used colored overlays to highlight significant mineral concentrations. "It's like a treasure map." The comparison was more accurate than Milo realized. According to the data displayed in the film, their property sat on top of one of the most concentrated rare earth element deposits in the Pacific Northwest. The elements shown, neodymium, europium, terbium, were crucial for modern electronics, renewable energy systems, and advanced manufacturing. But what made the discovery truly extraordinary was the accompanying documentation. Ezra hadn't just found valuable minerals. He developed environmentally sustainable extraction methods that could harvest these resources without destroying the ecosystem. His techniques, documented in meticulous detail throughout the coded films, represented breakthrough innovations in responsible mining technology. "Your great-grandfather was an environmental engineer," Noah explained to Milo as they watched footage of Ezra testing water purification systems and soil restoration techniques. "He figured out how to get valuable things from the ground without hurting the forest. The audio commentary for this film provided context that made Noah's hands shake as he listened. Ezra's calm voice explained that his extraction methods could yield approximately $40 million worth of rare earth elements over a 20-year period, while actually improving the local ecosystem through carefully managed soil enhancement and water purification. But the real value, Ezra's recorded voice continued, lies not in the extraction itself, but in the patents I've developed for sustainable mining technology. These innovations could revolutionize the entire industry, providing both environmental protection and economic opportunity for future generations. Noah paused the film, staring at the frozen image of mineral density charts that represented more wealth than he'd ever imagined. "Milo, I think your great-grandfather left us something much bigger than just a cabin." The boy seemed to understand the gravity of the moment, even if he couldn't fully grasp the financial implications. "Does this mean we don't have to worry about money anymore?" "Maybe, buddy. But first, we need to understand everything he left for us." The remaining coded films revealed the scope of Ezra's long-term planning. He'd spent decades not just researching and developing sustainable extraction techniques, but also navigating the complex legal and regulatory frameworks that would allow his heirs to benefit from his innovations. One film sequence showed Ezra meeting with patent attorneys, environmental regulators, and mining industry consultants. The coded commentary revealed that he'd been building a comprehensive legal strategy to protect his intellectual property and ensure that his sustainable mining techniques could be implemented without interference from larger corporations. Corporate interests have suppressed environmental innovation for decades, Ezra's voice explained during a particularly detailed segment about patent law. "By carefully structuring the inheritance and documentation, I can ensure that these technologies reach the market through proper channels, providing both environmental benefits and financial security for my family." But perhaps most importantly, the films revealed Ezra's deep understanding of the challenges his heirs would face. He'd anticipated that powerful interests would try to suppress or steal his innovations, just as they'd done throughout the history of environmental technology. His entire documentation system was designed to provide his family with the tools and knowledge needed to protect their inheritance and see his work reach its intended purpose. "The cellar is just the beginning," Ezra's voice explained in the final segment of the film. "Additional documentation and resources are stored at coordinates referenced throughout these films. Everything needed to claim and protect the family legacy has been preserved and hidden, waiting for those with the wisdom to seek truth beneath the surface." As the film ended and the projector fell silent, Noah felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Ezra hadn't just left them property, he'd left them a mission. The sustainable mining techniques, the environmental innovations, the careful legal preparations, all of it was designed to provide both financial security and the means to make a positive impact on the world. "What do we do now, Dad?" Milo asked, his young voice serious with the understanding that their lives had just changed in ways that would take years to fully comprehend. Noah looked at his son, this brave boy who'd lost his mother and followed his father into the wilderness without complaint. "Now we learn everything we can about what your great-grandfather discovered. And then we figure out how to finish what he started." The coded home movies had revealed their secrets, but Noah suspected they were still only seeing a fraction of what Ezra had prepared. Tomorrow, they would need to start locating the additional sites referenced in the films, begin the process of understanding the legal implications of their inheritance, and prepare for the challenges that would inevitably come when they tried to claim what was rightfully theirs. But tonight, as they carefully returned the films to their storage containers and secured the cellar for another day, Noah felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, hope for a future that extended far beyond mere survival. Ezra's gift wasn't just financial security. It was the chance to carry forward work that could benefit both their family and the world. The coded home movies, those seemingly innocent family memories, had proven to be the key to unlocking a legacy of innovation and environmental responsibility. As they walked back to the cabin through the darkening forest, Noah knew that their real journey was just beginning. Finding Eleanor Pemberton hadn't been part of Noah's plan, but desperate circumstances often lead to unexpected allies. The coded films had revealed the location of 3 additional hidden sites on the property, but accessing the information stored at these locations required expertise Noah didn't possess. When Milo suggested they ask someone at the Pine Ridge Library for help with research about local history, Noah decided it was worth a try. The Pine Ridge Public Library occupied a converted Victorian house on the town's main street, its wraparound porch and bay windows giving it the comfortable appearance of a beloved grandmother's home. Inside, tall shelves lined with well-worn books created cozy reading nooks, and the scent of old paper and binding glue spoke of decades of quiet learning. Eleanor Pemberton, the head librarian, was nothing like what Noah had expected. Instead of the stereotypical elderly woman with a stern demeanor, he found a sharp-eyed woman in her early 70s with silver hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and hands that showed the calluses of someone who worked with tools as often as books. "You're Noah Briggs," she said when he introduced himself. "Not a question, but a statement of fact. Ezra's grandson. I wondered when you'd find your way here." The directness caught Noah off guard. "You knew my grandfather." Eleanor's smile held layers of meaning. Ezra Briggs was one of the most interesting men I've ever known, also one of the most secretive. When he died, I figured someone would eventually come looking for answers to questions they didn't even know how to ask yet. She led Noah and Milo to a back room that served as her private office, its walls lined with maps, geological surveys, and what appeared to be historical documents related to the surrounding area. On her desk sat a collection of old photographs, several of which showed Ezra in conversation with various people around Pine Ridge. "Your grandfather came to me about 15 years ago," Eleanor explained, settling into her chair and gesturing for them to sit across from her. "He needed help with historical research, land records, mining claims, environmental studies. I'm something of an amateur geologist myself, so I understood what he was trying to accomplish." Noah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What exactly was he trying to accomplish? Eleanor studied him carefully before answering. He was trying to prove that this area had been systematically exploited by mining companies in the early 20th century, and that the environmental damage they'd caused could be reversed using new techniques he'd developed. But more than that, he was building a case to reclaim mineral rights that had been fraudulently transferred during the Depression. The revelation that someone else knew about Ezra's work was both encouraging and concerning. How much did Eleanor know? Could she be trusted? And most importantly, could she help them understand the legal complexities they were facing? "He showed me some of his research," Eleanor continued. "Brilliant work, really. His sustainable extraction methods could revolutionize the entire mining industry. But he was also paranoid, convinced that corporate interests would try to suppress his innovations or steal them outright." She pulled out a map of the local area, its surface covered with colored pins and hand-drawn notations. Ezra documented everything, but he also hid everything. He said that when the time came, his family would need allies who understood the stakes involved. Noah felt a chill of recognition. "You're one of those allies." "I am. Though I'll admit, I expected someone with more experience in legal battles and corporate intrigue. No offense, none taken. A week ago, I was an unemployed project manager with a dying wife and a mountain of medical bills. I'm not exactly prepared for corporate intrigue." Eleanor's expression softened. "I'm sorry for your loss. Ezra mentioned your situation in his letters. That's part of why he was so determined to preserve his work for you." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Eleanor explaining the historical context behind Ezra's research. During the 1920s and 1930s, several major mining companies had acquired mineral rights throughout the region through questionable legal maneuvers that took advantage of desperate landowners. During the economic crisis, the families who sold those rights were told they were worthless, that the land contained nothing but dirt and rocks, Eleanor explained. But the companies knew better. They'd conducted secret surveys that revealed significant mineral deposits. But what made the situation truly egregious was that the mining companies had never actually extracted the minerals they'd claimed. Instead, they'd held the rights as investments, waiting for technology and market conditions to make extraction profitable. Meanwhile, the families who'd sold the rights remained poor, unaware that they'd been cheated out of potential fortunes. Ezra's grandfather was one of those families, Eleanor revealed. The original Briggs homestead included mineral rights that were sold for, virtually nothing in 1934. Ezra spent decades researching the legal precedents that might allow those rights to be reclaimed. Noah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. That's why he was so secretive. He wasn't just developing new mining techniques. He was building a legal case to reclaim stolen property. Exactly. And if he was successful, it wouldn't just benefit your family. Dozens of other families in the region had their mineral rights taken through similar fraudulent transactions. Ezra saw himself as fighting for all of them. Eleanor stood and walked to a filing cabinet, retrieving a thick folder marked Briggs Research Confidential. He asked me to give this to his family when they came looking for answers. I've been waiting 5 years for that day. The folder contained copies of legal documents, historical surveys, and correspondence that provided crucial context for everything Noah and Milo had discovered in the cellar. But most importantly, it contained a detailed map showing the location of something Ezra called his primary archive. There's more than just the cellar you found, Eleanor explained. Ezra built a much larger facility deeper in the property. That's where he kept his most important research and documentation. She pointed to a location on the map that corresponded to the cedar beam they'd found in the cabin's main room. The map carved into that beam isn't just decorative, it's a precise guide to finding the primary archive. But accessing it requires knowledge that Ezra shared with only a few trusted individuals. Noah studied the cedar beam map, comparing it to Eleanor's documentation. The carved symbols that had seemed like random decorations were actually a sophisticated navigation system, with each mark corresponding to specific landmarks and distances. Why didn't he just tell someone directly where everything was hidden? Milo asked, looking up from a collection of photographs Eleanor had given him to examine. Eleanor smiled at the boy's practical question. Because your great-grandfather understood that powerful people would try to stop him if they learned what he was doing. By hiding his information in puzzles and codes, he ensured that only someone truly committed to finding the truth would be able to access his work. As they prepared to leave the library, Eleanor handed Noah a business card for a law firm in Seattle. When you're ready to move forward with legal action, these are the attorneys Ezra was working with. They specialize in environmental law and have experience with corporate fraud cases. The cedar beam map suddenly carried new significance as they drove back to the cabin. What Noah had initially dismissed as his grandfather's hobby was actually a precisely engineered guide to a fortune in both mineral wealth and intellectual property. But more than that, it was a roadmap to justice for families who'd been cheated out of their inheritance decades ago. That evening, as Noah studied the carved symbols by firelight while Milo slept, he felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. Ezra hadn't just left them a path to financial security. He'd left them the tools to fight a wrong that had persisted for nearly a century. The Keys cedar beam map, carved into the cabin's main support structure, was more than just decoration or even navigation aid. It was a declaration of intent, a permanent record of Ezra's determination to see justice done, regardless of how long it took. Tomorrow, they would begin the process of using Eleanor's information to locate the primary archive. But tonight, Noah traced the carved lines with his finger and wondered if he had the courage and determination to finish what his grandfather had started. The discovery of the patent documents bundle changed everything Noah thought he understood about their inheritance, hidden within the primary archive that Eleanor's map had helped them locate. The collection of original papers represented decades of innovative work that could reshape entire industries. The primary archive itself was a marvel of engineering, a climate-controlled underground facility accessed through a camouflaged entrance carved into a natural rock formation about half a mile from the cabin. Using Eleanor's guidance and the cedar beam map, Noah and Milo had spent 3 days locating and accessing the hidden space, which proved to be far more sophisticated than the original cellar. The facility contained multiple rooms, each dedicated to different aspects of Ezra's research. One room housed geological equipment and mineral samples, another contained legal documents and correspondence, and the largest space served as a comprehensive laboratory where Ezra had developed and tested his environmental technologies. But it was in the document archive that they found the patent documents bundle, a carefully preserved collection of original patent applications dating from 1975 to 1995, all bearing Ezra's name as the primary inventor. The technologies described in these documents were revolutionary. Methods for extracting rare earth elements without environmental damage, water purification systems that could clean industrial contamination, and soil remediation techniques that could restore damaged ecosystems. "Look at this." "Dad," Milo said, examining a diagram that showed one of Ezra's water purification systems. "It's like he figured out how to make dirty water clean again." The patents were more than just innovative, they were prophetic. Ezra had anticipated environmental challenges that wouldn't become widespread concerns until decades after he'd developed solutions for them. His carbon sequestration techniques, designed in the 1980s, directly addressed climate change issues that had only recently become major political and economic priorities. But what made the discovery truly significant was the accompanying legal analysis. According to documents prepared by Ezra's patent attorneys, several major corporations were currently using variations of his techniques without proper licensing or compensation. The estimated damages from these unauthorized uses ran into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Ecotech Industries is using a variation of Ezra's rare earth extraction method. Noah read from a legal memo dated just 6 months before his grandfather's death. Their process differs only in minor technical details that don't affect the fundamental innovation. Potential damages, $50–75 million. Similar analyses covered a dozen other companies across multiple industries. Green energy firms using Ezra's carbon capture techniques, mining companies employing his soil restoration methods, and water treatment facilities utilizing his purification innovations, all without acknowledgement or compensation to the original inventor. The pattern revealed a systematic theft of intellectual property that had enriched corporations while Ezra lived in isolation, fighting a lonely battle for recognition and justice. But more than just personal grievance, the documents showed how suppression of environmental innovation had delayed crucial technologies that could have addressed ecological challenges decades earlier. "Your great-grandfather wasn't just inventing things," Noah explained to Milo as they worked through the patent documentation. "He was trying to solve problems that are only now becoming serious enough for people to pay attention to." The legal strategy outlined in the documents was comprehensive and sophisticated. Rather than simply filing lawsuits for patent infringement, Ezra had been building a case that would expose the broader pattern of corporate suppression of environmental technology. His approach would not only recover financial damages, but also force the release of innovations that could benefit society as a whole. One particularly detailed analysis focused on the fraudulent acquisition of mineral rights during the Depression. Ezra's research had uncovered evidence that mining companies had used inside knowledge of geological surveys to target specific properties. then deliberately misrepresented the land's value to desperate families who had no choice but to sell. The systematic nature of these acquisitions suggests coordinated fraud rather than isolated incidents, one legal memo concluded. If successful, litigation could result in the return of mineral rights to dozens of affected families, with total value exceeding $200 million in current market conditions. But perhaps most importantly, the documents revealed Ezra's long-term vision for environmental restoration. His technologies weren't just designed to extract resources or clean up them. Contamination, they were part of an integrated approach to sustainable development that could serve as a model for responsible industrial activity. He wanted to prove that environmental protection and economic development could work together. Noah realized as he read through Ezra's personal notes, his techniques could make mining and manufacturing profitable while actually improving the ecosystem. The patent documents bundle also contained correspondence with environmental groups, academic researchers, and government agencies who had expressed interest in Ezra's work. Many of these letters revealed frustration with corporate resistance to innovation and regulatory systems that favored established interests over environmental progress. Dr. Briggs, your soil remediation techniques represent a breakthrough in environmental restoration, read one letter from a university researcher. It's unconscionable that corporate interests have prevented these innovations from reaching the market. I strongly encourage you to pursue legal action to protect your intellectual property. Similar endorsements came from environmental groups who had tested Ezra's methods and found them to be both effective and economically viable. The consensus was clear. Ezra had developed technologies that could transform entire industries, but corporate suppression had prevented their widespread adoption. As they worked through the documentation, Noah began to understand the scope of the challenge they faced. Recovering the financial value of Ezra's innovations would require taking on some of the largest and most powerful corporations in the country. These companies had built fortunes using stolen technologies and would not surrender their profits without a fight. But the documents also revealed that Ezra had anticipated this challenge and prepared accordingly. His legal team had identified specific vulnerabilities in corporate patent claims, documented clear evidence of fraudulent activity, and developed strategies for protecting his heirs throughout the litigation process. The key is coordination, one strategy memo explained. Rather than pursuing individual cases against each corporate infringer, we should file comprehensive litigation that exposes the broader pattern of environmental innovation suppression. This approach maximizes both financial recovery and social impact. The environmental patents represented more than just financial opportunity. They were weapons in a war against corporate greed and environmental destruction that Ezra had been fighting alone for decades. Now that battle would pass to Noah and Milo, armed with the documentation and legal strategies their grandfather had spent his lifetime preparing. That evening, as they secured the archive and prepared to return to the cabin, Noah felt the weight of inheritance in a new way. They weren't just inheritors of valuable technology. They were inheritors of a mission to see justice done and environmental innovation finally reach its intended purpose. The patent documents bundle that had seemed like overwhelming legal complexity was actually a carefully prepared toolkit for fighting corporate power and environmental destruction. Every page, every analysis, every strategy memo was part of Ezra's plan to ensure that his innovations would eventually serve their intended purpose, protecting the environment while providing economic security for the families that had been cheated out of their rightful inheritance. As they walked back through the darkening forest, Noah knew that their quiet life in the woods was about to end. The documents in the archive represented a path to wealth and justice, but also a path to conflict with powerful interests that had benefited from decades of environmental innovation suppression. Tomorrow, they would need to begin the process of contacting Ezra's legal team and preparing for the battles ahead. But tonight, Noah felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death, the certainty that their struggle had meaning beyond mere survival. The legal deed with its hidden clause changed everything. Noah thought he understood about their situation. What he'd discovered in a dusty file box marked original property documents wasn't just a simple land title, it was a masterpiece of legal strategy that had been waiting nearly 50 years for the right moment to reshape the entire region's mineral rights landscape. Eleanor had mentioned that some documents required special handling, but Noah hadn't expected to find papers that would need to be examined under UV light to reveal their complete contents. It was Milo who noticed that certain portions of the deed seemed darker than others, leading to the discovery that Ezra had used special inks to hide crucial information in plain sight. Under the UV lamp they'd found in the archives examination room, the deed revealed language that took Noah's breath away. What appeared to be a standard property transfer actually contained a buried clause that had been legally valid but invisible for decades, waiting for technological advancement to make its contents readable. Grantor hereby conveys not only surface rights to the described property, the hidden text read, but also reserves in perpetuity all mineral extraction rights within a radius of 10 miles of the described boundaries, said rights to revert to grantor's heirs upon satisfaction of environmental restoration requirements as detailed in attached schedules. Noah read the passage 3 times before its implications fully sank in. Milo, I think your great-grandfather owned mineral rights to most of this entire valley. The attached schedules, also written in UV reactive ink, detailed environmental requirements that had seemed impossible when the deed was originally filed in 1974. But with Ezra's sustainable extraction technologies, these requirements became not just achievable, but profitable. The grantor's sustainable mining techniques, one schedule specified, must be demonstrated to actually improve local ecosystem health over a 20-year period. Upon such demonstration, all mineral rights within the specified radius revert to grantor's heirs, along with compensation for 50 years of unauthorized extraction by current rights holders. The legal implications were staggering. If this deed was valid, and Eleanor's preliminary research suggested it was, then Noah and Milo weren't just owners of 47 acres. They were potentially the rightful owners of mineral rights covering nearly 200 square miles of the most resource-rich land in the Pacific Northwest. But more than just the scope of the claim. It was the timing that revealed Ezra's true genius. He'd structured the deed to activate only when environmental restoration became legally and technologically feasible. The hidden clause had been dormant for decades, waiting for exactly the current moment when climate change concerns and technological advancement had made sustainable mining both necessary and profitable. He knew, Noah realized as he studied the deed's intricate legal language, somehow he knew that environmental concerns would eventually force companies to adopt sustainable practices. He positioned us to benefit when that transition happened. The revelation that Ezra had been planning this strategy since the 1970s added new dimensions to everything they'd discovered. The patient documentation, the careful legal preparation, the environmental innovations, all of it had been building toward this moment when changing regulations and public awareness would make sustainable mining not just possible but mandatory. Eleanor arrived at the cabin that evening, responding to Noah's urgent phone call about the deed discovery. Her examination of the document confirmed its validity and revealed additional implications that Noah had missed. "This is remarkable legal craftsmanship," she said, studying the deed under the UV lamp. Ezra used environmental law provisions that were virtually unknown in 1974, but have become central to current mining regulation. He anticipated the entire evolution of environmental policy, but Eleanor's expertise also revealed the dangers inherent in their discovery. The corporations currently holding mineral rights in this area have invested billions in extraction infrastructure. They're not going to give up those investments without a fight. The hidden clause in the deed represented more than financial opportunity. It was a direct challenge to some of the most powerful mining interests in the country. Companies that had built fortunes, extracting resources under the assumption that their rights were permanent, would now face the possibility of losing everything to the rightful heirs they'd never known existed. "We need to be very careful about how we proceed," Eleanor warned. "Once word of this deed gets out, you'll be facing opponents with unlimited resources and no scruples about protecting their interests." But the deed also contained provisions that Ezra had designed to protect his heirs during the inevitable legal battles. The environmental restoration requirements were structured to provide ongoing income during litigation, while the sustainable mining techniques would demonstrate the viability of alternative approaches to resource extraction. He thought of everything. Noah marveled as Eleanor explained the deed's protective mechanisms. Every possible challenge, every legal obstacle, he prepared counter-strategies for all of it. The discovery of the deed's true contents also explained why Ezra had remained estranged from his family for so many years. The legal strategy he'd been pursuing required absolute secrecy, and even well-meaning family members could have inadvertently compromised decades of careful planning. He sacrificed his relationships to protect this opportunity, Noah realized. He lived alone so that we could have a chance at justice. But perhaps most remarkably, the deed revealed that Ezra's environmental innovations weren't just alternatives to current mining practices. They were requirements for claiming the mineral rights he'd preserved. The hidden clause stipulated that the rights would revert to his heirs only upon demonstration that sustainable extraction could be more profitable than traditional methods. "It's not enough to prove that his techniques work," Eleanor explained. "You have to prove that they work better than what the corporations are currently doing." Ezra designed this as a competition between environmental destruction and environmental restoration. The challenge was immense, but so was the potential reward. If Noah and Milo could successfully demonstrate Ezra's sustainable mining techniques, they would not only claim mineral rights worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they would also force an entire industry to adopt environmental practices that could help address climate change and ecosystem destruction. The environmental impact could be even more significant than the financial impact, Eleanor observed. If this deed holds up in court, it could establish legal precedent for environmental restoration requirements in mining contracts nationwide. As they worked through the implications of their discovery, Noah began to understand that Ezra's legacy extended far beyond their family's financial security. The legal deed, with its hidden clause, was designed to trigger a transformation in how natural resources were extracted and managed, using economic incentives to promote environmental protection. "Your great-grandfather wasn't just fighting for your family," Eleanor told Milo as the evening wore on. "He was fighting for the entire planet." The boy seemed to grasp the enormity of their inheritance in ways that surprised the adults. "So if we do this right, we can help fix the Earth and make sure we have enough money to take care of ourselves." "That's exactly right," Noah confirmed. "But it's going to be the hardest thing we've ever done." The deed that had appeared to be a simple property document was actually a time bomb that Ezra had set to explode at exactly the right moment in environmental history. The hidden clause represented decades of patient planning, legal expertise, and environmental innovation, all focused on a single goal, proving that economic prosperity and environmental protection could work together. But as Eleanor prepared to leave and Noah tucked Milo into bed, the weight of their discovery pressed down like a physical force. Tomorrow, they would need to begin the process of challenging some of the most powerful corporations in the world. Armed with nothing but Ezra's careful documentation and an unshakable belief that justice could still prevail, the legal deed with its revolutionary hidden clause wasn't just their inheritance, it was their weapon in a battle for the future of environmental protection and resource management. The question now was whether they had the courage and determination to use it. Ezra's journal provided the final pieces of a puzzle that had taken nearly 50 years to complete. Bound in weathered leather and filled with meticulous handwriting, the journal chronicled not just his scientific discoveries and legal strategies, but his personal struggle against forces that had seemed insurmountable. Noah found the journal in the archive's most secure vault, protected by multiple locks and environmental controls that had preserved every page in perfect condition. As he read his grandfather's words by the light of the underground facility's carefully positioned lamps, the full scope of Ezra's vision became clear. June 15th, 1975, one early entry read, "The mining companies think they've won by stealing our mineral rights, but they've only postponed justice. Environmental awareness is growing. Technology is advancing. Someday, someone will have the tools to prove that sustainable extraction is not only possible, but more profitable than their destructive methods. I intend to be ready for that day." The journal entries span decades, chronicling Ezra's painstaking research, his legal preparations, and his growing understanding of how environmental concerns would eventually force changes in mining practices. But more than just documenting his work, the journal revealed his deep emotional investment in creating a better future for his family and the world. "I know my isolation hurts the family," another entry confessed. "But if I can complete this work, if I can prepare the legal and scientific foundation needed to challenge corporate greed, then Noah and his children will inherit not just wealth, but the power to make a real difference." Reading these personal reflections while sitting in the facility Ezra had built with his own hands, Noah felt a connection to his grandfather that had been impossible during the old man's lifetime. Every piece of equipment, every carefully filed document, every innovative technique represented not just scientific achievement, but love expressed through decades of solitary labor. The journal also revealed the specific corporate opposition Ezra had identified and prepared to confront. Detailed profiles of mining executives, environmental lawyers, and government officials painted a picture of systematic corruption and environmental destruction that went far beyond simple profit-seeking. Morrison Mining Corporation knows their extraction methods are destroying the watershed, one entry detailed. Their internal reports, which I've obtained through sources I cannot name, acknowledge that their techniques will cause permanent environmental damage. Yet they continue operations because short-term profits outweigh long-term consequences in their calculations. But perhaps most remarkably, the journal documented Ezra's successful infiltration of corporate and government networks over the years. Working under various assumed identities and through carefully cultivated contacts, he'd gathered inside information about mining operations, environmental cover-ups, and regulatory manipulation that would provide crucial evidence in the legal battles ahead. "The key to defeating corporate power," Ezra had written, "is understanding how it operates. They depend on secrecy, regulatory capture, and public ignorance. By documenting their methods and developing superior alternatives, we can expose their vulnerabilities and force change through both legal action and public pressure." As Noah read deeper into the journal, he discovered that his grandfather's preparations extended far beyond legal documents and scientific research. Ezra had built a network of allies throughout the environmental movement, academic community, and even within the corporate world itself, people who shared his vision of sustainable development and were waiting for the right moment to support his cause. Dr. Sarah Chen at Pacific Environmental Institute has agreed to provide independent verification of my extraction techniques, one entry noted. Professor Michael Torres at Stanford Law School will serve as expert witness on environmental law precedents. Rebecca Martinez at the Environmental Defense Fund will coordinate media strategy when we go public. The scope of preparation was breathtaking. Ezra hadn't just developed innovative technologies and legal strategies. He'd built a comprehensive campaign infrastructure designed to challenge corporate power on multiple fronts simultaneously. Scientists, lawyers, environmentalists, and media specialists were all positioned to support the cause when the time came. But the journal also revealed the personal cost of Ezra's dedication. Entries from the 1980s and 1990s showed his growing isolation and the toll that decades of secret preparation had taken on his relationships and mental health. Sometimes I wonder if I've chosen the right path. One particularly poignant entry admitted, "I've sacrificed everything personal for this mission. But when I think about the environmental destruction that continues every day, when I consider what kind of world I'm leaving for future generations, I know there was no other choice." The final entries, written just months before Ezra's death, revealed his satisfaction with the legacy he'd prepared, but also his concern about whether his heirs would have the strength to carry forward his work. "Noah has always been more practical than idealistic," the last entry observed, "but losing Sarah may have awakened something deeper in him. Tragedy can either break a person or forge them into something stronger. I pray that when he discovers what I've left for him, he'll find the courage to finish what I've started." Reading these words while sitting beside Milo, who was carefully organizing survey maps with the serious concentration he'd inherited from his great-grandfather, Noah felt the weight of expectation and opportunity pressing down on him. Ezra had provided all the tools needed for success, but ultimate victory would depend on Noah's willingness to risk everything in a battle against forces that had seemed unbeatable for generations. The journal's final pages contain specific instructions for the final phase of Ezra's strategy, a coordinated campaign that would begin with legal filing and culminate in a public demonstration of sustainable mining techniques that would force corporations to abandon their destructive practices or face financial ruin. "The timing must be precise," Ezra had written. "File all legal claims simultaneously across multiple jurisdictions. Coordinate with environmental groups to maximize media impact. Demonstrate the viability of sustainable extraction techniques through controlled pilot projects. Force the corporations to defend their practices in court while proving that alternatives exist." But Ezra had also anticipated the corporate response and prepared countermeasures for every likely scenario. If companies tried to suppress evidence, he'd documented backup copies stored in multiple secure locations. If they attempted to discredit his science, he'd arranged for independent verification by respected academic institutions. If they resorted to intimidation or violence, he'd established legal protections and media connections that would turn such tactics into public relations disasters. "They will fight dirty," the journal warned. "Corporate lawyers will challenge every document, question every scientific claim, and attempt to delay proceedings until we run out of resources. But I've prepared for this. Every piece of evidence has been independently verified. Every legal claim has been researched and cross-referenced. Every scientific technique has been tested and documented according to the highest academic standards." The comprehensive nature of Ezra's preparation became clear as Noah read through the detailed action plans that filled the journal's final section. Contact lists for environmental lawyers, media representatives, and government officials. Schedules for demonstrating sustainable mining techniques. Strategies for handling corporate counterattacks and legal challenges. But perhaps most importantly, the journal contained personal advice for Noah and Milo about the psychological challenges they would face during the battles ahead. "Corporate power depends on making individuals feel small and helpless," Ezra had written. "They will try to convince you that the fight is hopeless, that compromise is the only realistic option, that protecting the environment requires accepting economic sacrifice. All of these messages are lies designed to preserve their control. Remember that you have something they lack, the truth, and the tools to prove it." As evening approached and they prepared to return to the cabin, Noah felt the transformation that Ezra had predicted beginning within himself. The practical project manager, who'd arrived at the cabin months ago, was being replaced by someone willing to take on the most powerful corporations in the world. For the sake of justice and environmental protection, the network of allies Ezra had built was ready to spring into action. Eleanor had already begun contacting the environmental lawyers and scientists whose names appeared throughout the journal. Media connections were being activated to ensure maximum coverage when the legal campaign began. Everything was in place for a coordinated assault on corporate environmental destruction that could reshape entire industries, but success would ultimately depend on Noah's willingness to risk the quiet life. He'd begun to build with Milo in favor of a public battle that would make them targets for corporate retaliation. The journal made clear that once they began the legal process, there would be no retreat and no compromise. "Tomorrow we make the first move," Noah told Milo, as they secured the archive for what might be the last time before beginning their public campaign. "Are you ready for our lives to change completely?" Milo looked up from the survey maps he'd been studying, his young face serious with understanding that exceeded his years. Great-Grandpa Ezra spent his whole life getting ready for this. "We can't let him down." The boy's simple statement captured the essence of their situation. Decades of preparation, sacrifice, and hope had led to this moment when a desperate father and his young son would challenge some of the most powerful interests in the world. Armed with nothing but the truth and an unshakable belief that justice could still prevail, Ezra's journal had provided the final piece of their inheritance. Not just the technical and legal tools needed for victory, but the emotional and spiritual foundation required to sustain them through the battles ahead. The leather-bound book that documented 50 years of struggle and preparation would serve as their guide through the challenges to come. That night, as Noah tucked Milo into bed and prepared for what might be their last peaceful evening for months to come, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: complete certainty about his purpose and direction. The transformation from desperate refugee to environmental warrior was complete. Tomorrow, the real battle would begin. But tonight, surrounded by the forest that had sheltered them and the legacy that would guide them, Noah felt ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Ezra's journal had shown them not just what to do, but why it mattered. Not just for their family's financial security, but for the future of environmental protection and corporate accountability. The climax that had been building for 50 years was about to begin, and Noah knew that success or failure would determine not just their own fate, but the future of sustainable development and environmental justice for generations to come. The confrontation began at dawn with the arrival of corporate representatives who had somehow learned about their discovery, despite months of careful secrecy. Noah woke to the sound of vehicles approaching the cabin, their engines cutting through the forest silence like chainsaws through ancient timber. From the cabin window, he could see 3 black SUVs parked in the clearing, their occupants emerging with the coordinated precision of a military operation. Men in expensive suits accompanied by others whose casual clothing couldn't quite hide the fact that they were private security contractors. "Dad, what's happening?" Milo asked, appearing at Noah's side with peanuts clutched in his arms. "The people your great-grandfather warned us about," Noah replied, his voice steadier than he felt. "They've come to try to stop us before we can file our legal claims." The lead representative, a silver-haired man in his 60s, who carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way, approached the cabin porch with measured steps. His companions remained by the vehicles, their positions clearly chosen to cover all possible escape routes. "Mr. Briggs," the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the morning air. "My name is Thomas Morrison, Executive Vice President of Morrison Mining Corporation. I'd like to discuss a business proposition that could benefit both our interests." The name sent a chill through Noah. Morrison Mining was the primary target identified in Ezra's journal, the corporation whose environmental destruction and fraudulent mineral rights acquisitions had motivated decades of patient preparation. Noah opened the cabin door, but remained on the threshold, keeping Milo behind him. "What kind of business proposition involves surrounding someone's home with armed men, Mr. Morrison?" Morrison's smile was practiced and cold. These gentlemen are simply here for security purposes. Corporate executives receive death threats regularly, I'm afraid. It's an unfortunate necessity in today's climate. The explanation was smooth and plausible, but Noah could see the positioning of the security contractors and recognized the intimidation tactic for what it was. Morrison wanted him to feel isolated and outnumbered before the conversation even began. "We understand you've discovered some documents related to your grandfather's research," Morrison continued. "We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for any materials that might impact ongoing mining operations in this region." The offer that followed was staggering: $50 million for all documents, equipment, and property, plus relocation assistance to anywhere in the country. Morrison presented it as a generous solution that would provide financial security while avoiding costly litigation that might drag on for years. "Your grandfather was brilliant, but he was also unrealistic about the economic realities of resource extraction," Morrison explained. "Sustainable mining sounds wonderful in theory, but it can't compete with traditional methods when it comes to actual profitability. We're offering you the chance to benefit from his work without wasting years fighting battles you can't win." But Noah had read Ezra's journal. He understood that Morrison's presence at the cabin proved that the corporation viewed Ezra's innovations as a genuine threat to their business model. Companies didn't offer $50 million to suppress ideas that were merely theoretical. "You're here because you know my grandfather was right," Noah said quietly. "You know his techniques work better than yours, and you're terrified of what happens when that becomes public knowledge." Morrison's practiced smile faltered slightly. "Mr. Briggs, I think you misunderstand the complexities involved in large-scale resource extraction. Your grandfather's ideas were interesting, but they were never tested under real-world conditions." The lie was so brazen that Noah almost laughed. Ezra's journal had documented successful pilot projects, independent verification by academic institutions, and Morrison Mining's own internal reports acknowledging the superiority of sustainable extraction techniques. "We're not selling," Noah said firmly. "Not the documents, not the property, and not our legal rights." Morrison's expression hardened. "Mr. Briggs, you have a young son to consider. Legal battles can be very expensive and very dangerous. Corporations have resources that individuals simply cannot match. Sometimes the wisest course is to accept a generous offer rather than risk losing everything in a fight you cannot win." The threat was clear, but Noah felt something unexpected rising within him. Not fear, but anger. These men had come to his home, threatened his family, and tried to buy him off with money stolen from decades of environmental destruction. "Get off my property," Noah said, stepping fully onto the porch. "All of you. Now." Morrison's mask of corporate civility finally slipped completely. "You're making a serious mistake, Mr. Briggs. We tried to handle this professionally. But if you insist on pursuing legal action, you'll discover that corporations have many ways of protecting their interests." As the men returned to their vehicles, Noah noticed something that sent his heart racing. Official survey stakes marking the property boundaries. Stakes that hadn't been there the day before. Morrison Mining had been conducting unauthorized surveys on his land, probably trying to gather intelligence about Ezra's extraction sites. But as the SUVs disappeared down the dirt road, Noah realized something significant had just happened. The corporate response proved that Ezra's strategy was working exactly as planned. Morrison wouldn't have come personally, wouldn't have offered $50 million, wouldn't have resorted to intimidation unless he was genuinely afraid of what Noah and Milo could accomplish. The battle had been joined, and the first victory belonged to them. The settlement agreement that emerged from 6 months of intensive legal warfare represented complete vindication of Ezra's 50-year strategy. Signed in the conference room of the Seattle law firm that had championed their cause, the document formally recognized Noah and Milo's mineral rights while establishing a new model for sustainable resource extraction that could reshape entire industries. The final legal battle had been as intense as Ezra's journal had predicted. Morrison Mining and its corporate allies had deployed armies of lawyers, challenged every document, and attempted to discredit both the science and the legal foundations of Noah's claims. But Ezra's meticulous preparation had anticipated every attack, and the network of allies he'd assembled over decades had provided expert testimony, media support, and legal resources that matched corporate power. The breakthrough had come when independent scientific testing confirmed that Ezra's sustainable extraction techniques could indeed yield higher profits than traditional mining methods, while actually improving ecosystem health. Environmental groups had organized public demonstrations of the technologies, creating media pressure that made corporate opposition increasingly untenable. The scientific evidence is irrefutable, the lead environmental lawyer had announced during closing arguments. Dr. Briggs developed techniques that represent the future of responsible resource extraction. The defendants have had decades to develop similar innovations but chose to suppress environmental progress in favor of short-term profits. But perhaps most damaging to corporate interests had been the exposure of internal documents showing that Morrison Mining had known about environmental alternatives for years, but had actively worked to prevent their development. Public outrage over corporate environmental suppression had turned the legal battle into a broader referendum on sustainable development. Eleanor had played a crucial role throughout the proceedings, providing historical research that documented the fraudulent acquisition of mineral rights during the Depression and connecting Noah's case to broader patterns of corporate exploitation. Her testimony had established that environmental injustice wasn't just a current issue, but part of a century-long pattern of corporate abuse. This case represents more than just one family's fight for justice, Eleanor had told the court. It's about whether we'll continue to allow corporate interest to suppress environmental innovation that could address climate change and ecosystem destruction. The community support that had emerged during the legal proceedings had surprised everyone, including Noah. Families throughout the region who had been cheated out of mineral rights decades earlier had joined the lawsuit, creating a class action that gave their individual claims collective power. Environmental groups, academic institutions, and even some government agencies had provided support that made corporate opposition increasingly difficult to sustain, but it was Milo's role in the final proceedings that had captured public attention and media coverage. The 8-year-old boy who had discovered the hidden cellar door had become a symbol of environmental hope, representing the next generation's stake in sustainable development and climate protection. My great-grandpa knew that kids like me would need clean air and water, Milo had told reporters outside the courthouse. He spent his whole life making sure we'd have the tools to fix the problems that grown-ups made. The settlement agreement that resulted from this pressure was comprehensive and precedent-setting. Morrison Mining and its partners agreed to pay $320 million in damages for decades of unauthorized mineral extraction and environmental destruction. More importantly, they committed to adopting Ezra's sustainable techniques for all future operations, with independent monitoring to ensure compliance. But the financial settlement was only part of the victory. The agreement also established legal precedents that would make environmental suppression more difficult for corporations throughout the country. Future mining operations would be required to demonstrate that their techniques were as environmentally sound as available alternatives, creating market incentives for sustainable innovation. This settlement proves that environmental protection and economic prosperity can work together, Noah told the gathering of lawyers, environmental advocates, and media representatives who had assembled for the signing ceremony. My grandfather's vision of sustainable development isn't just possible, it's more profitable than the destructive methods corporations have been using for decades. The personal transformation that the legal battle had wrought in Noah was as significant as the public victory. The desperate, grieving father who had arrived at the cabin months earlier had been replaced by someone who understood his power to effect change and his responsibility to protect environmental progress for future generations. But perhaps most importantly, the settlement ensured that Ezra's innovations would finally reach their intended purpose. The sustainable extraction techniques that had been suppressed for decades would now be implemented on a scale that could make a real difference in addressing climate change and environmental destruction. As Noah and Milo prepared to leave the law firm and return to their forest home, the weight of achievement felt almost as heavy as the burden of responsibility had been. They had accomplished something that had seemed impossible, taking on corporate power and winning decisively. The settlement agreement represented more than just financial security for their family. It was proof that justice could still prevail, that environmental protection could be economically viable, and that ordinary people could challenge the most powerful interests in society when they were armed with truth and determination. Walking out of the Seattle law office into the afternoon sunlight, Noah felt something he hadn't experienced since Sarah's death: complete confidence in the future. The battle that had consumed his grandfather's lifetime was over, and the victory belonged to environmental progress and sustainable development. But more than victory, the settlement represented hope. Hope that the next generation would inherit a world where economic prosperity and environmental protection worked together, where corporate power served environmental progress rather than suppressing it, and where the innovations needed to address climate change would no longer be hidden beneath moss and roots in forgotten forest clearings. 1 year after the settlement, the transformed cabin stood as a testament to both restoration and renewal. Where sagging roof beams had once threatened collapse, hand-hewn timber now supported a structure that would endure for generations. The leaning porch had been rebuilt with the same attention to craftsmanship that Ezra had brought to his original construction, and the cracked windows had been replaced with energy-efficient glass that sparkled in the morning sunlight. But the changes extended far beyond mere repairs. The cabin had become the headquarters for the Briggs Foundation for Environmental Innovation, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting sustainable technology development and ensuring that environmental progress could never, again, be suppressed by corporate interests. Noah stood on the rebuilt porch, watching Milo explore the forest with the same boundless curiosity that had led to their discovery of the hidden cellar. But now, the boys' explorations were guided by scientific knowledge and environmental understanding that would have made his great-grandfather proud. "Dad, look what I found," Milo called from the tree line, holding up a device that looked like a combination metal detector and environmental scanner. "The soil composition here is perfect for the new carbon sequestration techniques Dr. Chen is developing." The partnership with Pacific Environmental Institute had produced innovations that even Ezra might not have imagined. Building on his sustainable extraction methods, researchers had developed techniques for actively reversing environmental damage while generating economic value. The pilot projects running on their property were demonstrating that damaged ecosystems could be restored to better than original condition while producing valuable resources. Eleanor had become the Foundation's chief research coordinator, her historical expertise and local knowledge providing crucial context for ongoing projects. The basement archive that had once hidden Ezra's secrets now served as a research library where environmental scientists from around the world came to study sustainable development techniques. "The most remarkable thing about your grandfather's work," Eleanor often told visitors, wasn't just his technical innovations, but his understanding that environmental protection had to be economically viable to succeed. He created a model that makes sustainability profitable. The restored family portrait that now held the place of honor on the mantelpiece showed 3 generations together: Ezra, Noah, and Milo, standing beside the cabin that had sheltered them all. The new photograph had been carefully composed to mirror the original, but the expressions were different. Where Ezra's eyes had held the watchfulness of someone guarding secrets, Noah and Milo's faces showed the confidence of people whose mission was public and whose success was measured in positive change. The financial security that the settlement had provided was life-changing. But Noah had discovered that wealth meant little without purpose. The foundation work gave their prosperity meaning, ensuring that Ezra's innovations continued to develop and spread rather than simply enriching one family. "We're not rich because we won money," Noah had explained to Milo during one of their evening conversations by the fireplace. "We're rich because we can help solve problems that matter." The boy's understanding of their situation had evolved along with his age and experience. Now 9 years old, Milo could discuss sustainable mining techniques, environmental law, and corporate responsibility with a sophistication that amazed the adult researchers who visited the foundation. But perhaps most importantly, he understood the connection between their personal healing and their environmental mission. The grief over Sarah's death had never disappeared, but it had been transformed into determination to create a world where families wouldn't have to choose between economic security and environmental health. The community transformation had been as significant as the family changes. Pine Ridge had evolved from a struggling rural town into a center for environmental innovation, with sustainable technology companies relocating to the area to be near the foundation's research facilities. The economic benefits of environmental progress were becoming visible throughout the region. Frank Kowalski, the hardware store owner who had initially been skeptical of city folks lasting in the woods, had become one of the foundation's strongest local supporters. His store now carried sustainable technology products alongside traditional hardware, and he often served as an unofficial ambassador for visitors wanting to understand the community's transformation. Used to be that environmental protection meant economic hardship around here, Frank would tell newcomers. The Briggs Foundation proved that wasn't true. Conservation can create more jobs and wealth than exploitation ever did. The legal precedents established by their case were rippling through environmental law nationwide. Other families who had been cheated out of mineral rights were successfully reclaiming their property, using strategies developed during Noah and Milo's battle with Morrison Mining. Environmental groups were using similar legal approaches to challenge corporate suppression of sustainable technology in other industries. But beyond legal and economic changes, the foundation was creating cultural shifts in how people thought about environmental issues. Ezra's vision of environmental protection as economic opportunity rather than economic sacrifice was gaining acceptance among business leaders, politicians, and ordinary citizens who had previously viewed conservation and prosperity as incompatible. As evening settled over the forest and Noah called Milo in for dinner, the sounds were subtly different from those first nights after their arrival. The forest was healthier now, its restoration visible in the diversity of wildlife sounds and the clarity of the stream that ran near the cabin. The sustainable extraction projects had actually improved the ecosystem while generating the resources needed to fund ongoing environmental work. During dinner, Milo shared his latest discoveries and ideas with the enthusiasm of a young scientist who understood that his work could make a real difference. His plans for expanded carbon sequestration, improved water purification, and ecosystem restoration showed the same innovative thinking that had driven his great-grandfather's lifetime of research. Great-grandpa Ezra would be proud of what we've accomplished, Milo said as Noah tucked him into bed. But I think he'd also want us to keep going, to solve even bigger problems. Noah smiled at his son's ambition while recognizing the truth in his words. Ezra's legacy wasn't just the specific innovations he'd developed, but the model he'd created for using scientific knowledge and legal strategy to challenge corporate power and environmental destruction. Outside, the forest held the same peaceful sounds that had once seemed lonely but now felt welcoming. The red fox that had led Milo to the hidden cellar still appeared occasionally, as if checking on the progress of the humans who had finally unlocked the secrets it had helped reveal. The journey from desperate refugees to environmental advocates had taken less than 2 years, but the changes felt permanent and profound. The cabin that had once represented last resort now symbolized hope and renewal. The forest that had initially seemed isolated now connected them to a global community of people working for sustainable development and environmental justice. As Noah prepared for sleep, he reflected on the path that had brought them to this point. Sometimes life does take everything you love, but sometimes it also provides the tools needed to build something better from the ruins. Ezra's gift hadn't just been financial security, it had been the opportunity to transform personal tragedy into purposeful action that could benefit the entire world. The legacy would continue through Milo and beyond, carried forward by each generation that understood the connection between environmental health and human prosperity. The hidden cellar door that had seemed like an ending was actually a beginning, opening pathways to a future where sustainability and success worked hand in hand.